Sorry, too many things at once. Good morning. It's Thursday, the 25th of June, 2026, and welcome to this month's Rotherham District Council Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Brian Drayson, the Chair of the Committee. The Committee is required to consider the applications that are before it today against national and local planning policies. Where these policies appear to conflict with each other, the members are required to use their individual knowledge, experience and judgment to come to a decision for the benefit of the whole of Rotherham District. It should be noted that the Planning Committee is not a public meeting, but a meeting that the public may attend. Rotherham District Council has a public speaking scheme which allows members of the public and others to address the committee on a particular application. Full details are on the RDC website. We're joined in the chamber this morning by the following officers: Matthew Worsley, the Development Manager, Kirsty Cameron, Principal Solicitor Planning, and Edwin Cork, Principal Planning Officer. Helping with the meeting itself, we have two officers from Democratic Services, Julie Hollands, the Committee Secretary, and Eleanor Drew, who's looking after our webcast. Online this morning, we have two councillors, two members of the committee, Councillor Tony Ganley and Councillor Cheryl Creaser. Can I just ask you both to say something so I know your microphones are working? Councillor Creaser?
Something.
Thank you. And Councillor Ganley? We will never know. It was stuck earlier, which is why we threw him out. He's come back and we'll see. Right. Members online can take part in discussions, but they cannot vote on any motion or actually propose any motion to be voted on. May I please remind members in the chamber to make sure they turn their microphones on and off as appropriate and speak clearly and directly into them. For those in the chamber this morning, there are no fire alarm tests scheduled for today, so in the event of a fire alarm, please exit the chamber by the nearest fire exit and reassemble in the outside front car park to be accounted for. Can I please also ask that everyone make sure that their mobile phones are switched off or in silent mode. And I'm just going to check, was that you, Councillor Ganley, receiving us loud and clear?
That was me.
That was you feedback. Okay, thank you. Right, and now on to the agenda. Agenda item 1. Do I have your authority to sign the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 28th of May as a correct record of the proceedings? Yes? Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 2, any apologies for absence and substitutes? I don't think we've got any. Do we have any, Julie?
No, there's none, Chair.
Thank you. Any additional agenda items?
No, there's none, Chair.
And number 4 is normally just withdrawn applications, but because I know the answer already, are there any withdrawn agenda items either? Julie?
Yes, agenda item 9, so that it's RR2023 1721P, the Rosewood Park verbal update. That's been withdrawn and that will be discussed at a future meeting.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, disclosures of interests and dispensations. To receive any disclosures by members of disclosable pecuniary interests and other registrable and non-registrable interests in matters on the agenda. The nature of any such interest and details of any dispensations obtained. Thank you. Obviously, if something dawns on you during the meeting, please declare it. Agenda item 6, the Planning Applications Index. This document shows the Planning Committee procedures and also on the final page the applications being considered by the committee today. For each application, the officer will first present the report to the committee. Then, if it is subject to the public speaking scheme, any registered speakers will be invited to address the committee. The committee may then also hear comments from the ward councillor before asking officer questions on their report. Members will then be invited to make any comments they may have on planning merits of the proposal themselves and debate the issues before proceeding to a vote. Excuse me. The members of the committee understand that planning meeting matters can be very emotive, especially for those directly affected by the outcome. Nevertheless, I would like to ask everyone within the chamber to remain calm and courteous throughout the meeting. Right, moving on to agenda item 7, application RR/2025/1848/RVC. The Oak Stables Kingswood Hill Breed. The proposal is the removal and variation of conditions imposed on planning permission RR 2020-1613P to allow for a permanent change of use of the land for the stationing of one static mobile home and one touring caravan and proposed erection of one day room, or for gypsy and traveller occupation. The recommendation is that it be resolved to grant full planning permission. The case officer is Edwin Cork. The ward member is Councillor Gordon, who is in the chamber today, and the reason is for the committee discussing it. It was referred by Councillor Gordon, and I'm sure he will touch on the reasons during his presentation to us. Thank you. This application is subject to the public speaking scheme. Therefore, the planning officer will present his report, and then before we ask questions of the officer, the committee will hear from a representative from Breed Parish Council and the ward councillor. Members will then ask questions of the officer before proceeding to their deliberations. Edwin Cork is the officer, and who will now present his report. Edwin, please.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Just before we go into it, there's just a verbal update on the application. The reasons for member referral for committee consideration have been confirmed as conflict with the High Weald Management Plan, breach of the explicit purpose of temporary permission, and the site being outside the district's development boundary, or outside of a development boundary. There are also several amendments in relation to the schedule of conditions that are proposed. This includes removal of condition 10, which currently restricts the size of a static mobile home, but this is controlled by separate legislation, so we don't consider it to be reasonable to have this condition. And we're also proposing an additional 2 conditions, one precluding use of the day room for sleeping or overnight accommodation, and the other one is to control external lighting at the site. So the 2 additional conditions, one is to prevent use of the day room for sleeping or overnight accommodation, and the second additional one is to control external lighting at the site.
So, Councillor Barnes, and it's basically they're the 2 conditions that we added to a similar application to make sure that the day room is not used for sleeping and overnight accommodation, and to make sure that the external lighting connected with the day room doesn't affect the dark skies and isn't excessive.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Mear.
Chair, members of the public and speakers at the back are having trouble hearing.
I shall try and talk louder. Is that better? Perfect. Okay, members visited the site on Tuesday this week. Matt, if you could just show the location plan. The site, currently occupied by a gypsy and traveller family, is in the countryside and within the High Weald National Landscape. It lies on the eastern side of the A28, Kingswood Hill, between an open field within the applicant's ownership to the north, an area of woodland within the applicant's ownership to the east, a pond and neighbouring residential property, King Woodland, to the south, and the main road to the west. A public footpath runs through the adjacent woodland, and the neighbouring property or neighbouring dwelling is a Grade 2 listed building, that being the one to the south. Matt, perhaps you could go on to the aerial image, please. So this is an aerial image of the site. You can see that the static mobile caravan that's on the site is on the right-hand side. There's an existing stable block in the middle, and there is a small white touring caravan, which you can see just to the north of the mobile home. And the Grade 2 listed building is sort of hidden amongst the trees to the southwest, as you look at the Google image. Just as I said, existing on-site accommodation includes the static mobile home and touring caravan and the stable building, which was granted permission in 2009. There's also an oil tank on the site, which members viewed on Tuesday, and there is also a packaged sewage treatment plant, which has a drainage field to the west. Matt, if you can go on the next one, please. And that's sort of illustrated there. The drainage field is the sort of blue hatched lines on the left-hand side. You have the mobile home to the far right-hand side, which is sort of the largest rectangular black outline, and then you have the proposed day room to the north of the stable building, which is a smaller rectangular building just to the south of it. The remainder of the site consists of a mixture of open grassland and hard standing. In November 2022, members resolved to grant a temporary 3-year permission for use of the land as a gypsy and traveller site to include the stationing of 1 mobile home, 1 touring caravan and associated hard and soft landscaping and the proposed erection of a day room. This was despite the development causing harm to the landscape and scenic beauty of the High Weald National Landscape. The reason for members deciding to grant a temporary permission was the uncertainty over the deliverability of the gypsy and travel allocations within the Rother Development and Site Allocations Local Plan, together with the anticipation that at the end of the 3-year period, the Council would have adopted a new local plan with sufficient gypsy and traveller allocations to meet the district's identified need. Currently, the emerging local plan is progressing, but is not yet at an advanced stage of preparation. This new application proposes to remove the temporary time limit condition to allow for a permanent change of use of the land for the stationing of 1 static mobile home, 1 touring caravan, together with the erection of a day room, and that's all for gypsy traveller occupation. The proposal would create 1 permanent pitch. And if you just scroll through, Matt, there's also a drawing showing, well, the static that's on the site at the moment, and if you go to the next slide, that is the drawing of the proposed day room, which includes a bathroom, utility room and lounge. And it's shown with a brick plinth, timber cladding and tiled roof. It's a single-storey structure measuring 5 metres by 8 metres in terms of its footprint. In terms of determining whether planning permission should be granted for a permanent pitch, the committee report sets out the relevant policy considerations, one of which is the existing level of local provision and the need for permanent gypsy and traveller sites in the district. On this matter, there is currently an outstanding need to provide 18 permanent pitches in the district to 2040, and this means that the provisions in paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework apply in the determination of this application. In this case, the granting of a permanent permission would help to address the district's outstanding need for permanent gypsy and traveller pitches, and it is material that the site is proposed to be allocated for 1 permanent pitch in the emerging local plan under policy reference GYP3. Against the district's outstanding need, the delivery of a permanent pitch carries significant weight. As set out in the committee report, it is also relevant that the applicant and his family fall within the gypsy and traveller definition at Annex 1 of Planning Policy for Traveller Sites. The personal circumstances of the family remain the same and this carries significant weight. The site is not located in a nature conservation designated area, it's not in an area at risk from flooding, and it's not in close proximity to a source protection zone or significantly contaminated land. The site is in a sustainable location with good access to local services and facilities which can all be reached by foot. Adequate site access and parking arrangements are in place. Adequate drainage arrangements are in place. The proposal does not give rise to significant adverse impacts on the living conditions of the occupants of neighbouring residential properties, and the proposal does not harm the setting of the neighbouring Grade 2 listed building, King Woodland. It is acknowledged that granting permission for a permanent pitch will cause permanent harm to the landscape and scenic beauty of the Highwood National Landscape, and this would conflict with development plan policies, objectives of the Highwood A&B management plan, and policies in the National Planning Policy Framework. It will also be at odds with the statutory duty to seek to further the purpose of conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the area, which is outlined or detailed at Section 85A1 of the Countryside and Rights of Way Act 2000. However, this is a small-scale development consisting of one gypsy and traveller pitch, and the site is well screened from the wider landscape by mature trees and hedges. Furthermore, the site has a history of development, including polytunnels and stables, and is close to existing scattered residential development along this stretch of the A28. Officers consider the harm to the landscape and scenic beauty of the national landscape to be localised and limited rather than significant harm. Having regard to the first point of paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework, this level of harm does not provide a strong reason for refusing the development proposed. The second point is therefore engaged, and officers consider the limited harm to the national landscape does not outweigh the significant weight given to the delivery of one permanent gypsy and traveller pitch, which would help to address the district's outstanding need. Turning to the conflict with the statutory duty to seek to further the purpose of conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the area, the personal circumstances of the family must also be considered. If planning permission is refused and any subsequent appeal is dismissed, it is likely that the family would have to leave the site. This would result in interference with their human rights regarding Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which encompasses respect for family life and the home. It is consistent with relevant case law that the best interests of children should be a primary consideration in any decision on the application, although it is not necessarily the determining factor. In this case, the best interests of the children living on the site are to remain on the site and for the proposed development to be retained as provided. On balance, it is recommended that planning permission is granted to create one permanent gypsy and traveller pitch, subject to removing, reimposing, varying the relevant conditions of the temporary permission, additional conditions to control external lighting at the site, secure the use of appropriate external materials for the day room, and also to preclude its use for sleeping or overnight accommodation are also required. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We now have public speaking. Edwin. We now come to public speaking. We will hear first from Councillor Martin Griffiths on behalf of Brede Parish Council, whose comments, as with all speakers, should focus on the material planning considerations and not introduce new information that was not included in their written submission. And we will then hear from Councillor Gordon, the Ward Councillor. Each speaker will have up to 5 minutes to address the committee, and I will interrupt anyone who is still speaking at the 5-minute mark. Councillor Griffiths, if you can, please. And settle yourself before we're not going to start the clock until you're ready. Sorry, could you put your microphone on? Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, first hurdle. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee. I don't intend to go through every objection submitted in writing by the council. However, there are 3 main issues that I wish to address. At all times, Brede Parish Council has objected to planning permission being granted for development on this site. Our first reason for objecting is that the site is located within the countryside. It is outside a recognised development boundary. It is within the Highwood National Landscape and is within the Brede Valley Landscape Character Area. Development of this site conflicts with the relevant policies relating to those areas. The site is in open landscape between two clearly defined settlements, namely Cackle Street and Broad Oak. Allowing development within that area creates a risk of suburbanisation of the rural landscape. Both reports by officers, namely July 2022 and June 2026, acknowledge that this proposal causes harm to the countryside and landscape and scenic beauty of the High Weald National Landscape. The report from the previous application stated that the application site is not an allocated site and being outside areas that are allocated in the development plan, it does not accord with paragraph 25 of the PPTS. Therefore, these applications should not be granted. Secondly, Brede Parish Council is concerned about the significant impact this development has on the neighbour whose property adjoins the site. The July 2022 report at 9.3 went on to say that the presence of external domestic paraphernalia and lighting at night from inside the caravans adds to the harmful impact that the development has, but, I quote, the harm is reduced by the natural screening of the site provided by existing vegetation and topography. The mobile home is located close to the neighbour's boundary. It is correct to say that the neighbour's property is screened by natural vegetation in the height of summer. However, the whole of the neighbour's garden is overlooked at other times of the year when there is no vegetation, and this represents a significant and unacceptable loss of privacy. Contrary to the applicant's planning statement, which says there is a high degree of, contrary to the applicant's planning statement, there is a high degree of unacceptable overlooking. We strongly disagree with the assessment at 7.13.1 of the officer's report that there is no unacceptable overlooking. An example of the impact this development has had on the neighbour is that they have had to erect a 6-foot-high fence in order to screen part of the house from the driveway of the site. The driveway is just over 9 feet from the windows of the kitchen and bathroom of the house. In more general terms, the Parish Council are of the view that the scale and dominance of the various buildings on this site are too big for a rural setting. We do not agree with the officer's assessment at 7.10.7 that the existing and proposed structures are well separated from the listed building, nor with the assessment at 7.10.8 that the structures do not harm the listed building. Furthermore, we maintain that the existing and proposed structures amount to an overdevelopment of the site. Thirdly, notwithstanding the harm that has been recognised and accepted and the conflict with policy and statutory duty, planning permission was granted in November 2022 for a limited period, A, because at that time there was uncertainty over the deliverability of gypsy and traveller sites in Rother, and it was anticipated that within 3 years a new local plan would include sufficient allocations, and B, that moving the occupants would interfere with the schooling of Mr and Mrs Penfold's 3 children, who we were told were at local schools. We know that the delivery of the new local plan has been delayed due to changes in central government housing and planning policy in the last 2 years. So if permission is to be granted for this application, it should again only be granted for a limited period until the new local plan is finalised and approved and we know exactly what the position is regarding the allocation of new gypsy and traveller sites. Furthermore, we have no information, understandably due to data protection reasons, as to the ages of the children or which schools they attend. If they are still of school age, and if they attend schools which are in the catchment area, for which Brede is in their catchment area, then again, any further planning permission or variations of conditions should only be granted for a limited period of time until they finish their schooling. In summary, because of the harm to the landscape, and because the development conflicts with local and national policies, and because of the impact of the neighbour's property, Brede Parish Council objects to any form of development on this site. But if the committee is minded to grant permission, then that permission should be for a limited period only for Mr and Mrs Penfold and for their school-aged children. We would also ask that a condition is put on that a fence is erected on the site to screen the neighbour's property. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, Councillor Gordon. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. The Oak Stables is a field and is a natural part of a break in between Broad Oak and Brede. And louder. unsuitable for permanent traveller site. I'm surprised only 15 objections have been received. Certainly most Fridays I attend the market in Breed, and I certainly get a lot of feedback on this subject. So the field lies within the high national landscape, which is the highest protection available to a field. It's a protected area of national importance. Traveller sites and general housing are considered unacceptable due to its statutory planning protections. Permanent traveller site introduces large static caravan, utility day room, hard standing tarmac, external lighting that conflict with traditional rural character on that break between Broadoak and Breed. Developing this field is an encroachment on the countryside between Breed and Broadoak. Secondly, it's outside the development boundary. 3, it's harming a listed heritage asset. Placing a traveller caravan and day room 3 metres from the boundary of a Grade 2 17th century listed building is highly sensitive. Assorted domestic items, parked cars, external lighting, fences, washing lines remain highly visible. A poplar footpath connecting Broadoak and Breed runs north-south to the east of the field. The A28 borders the field to the west with deciduous trees. In winter there is less vegetation, making the field more visible. Environmental protection. Reports of smells, soapy water, bath water polluting the pond to the south has been reported. This is a major point for objection. Citing a permanent traveller development here without mains infrastructure conflicts with national planning guidelines and environmental policies and watercourse contamination. When this site was granted temporary permission under RR diagonal 2020 diagonal 1613 diagonal P, infrastructure shortcuts can be tolerated. Shifting from temporary to permanent change of use will alter planning balance, as it must meet long-term sustainability criteria before it becomes a permanent residential site. A cesspit is environmentally sensitive area is viewed as unsuitable. Bearing of asbestos has been reported in the field and has actually been reported to the Rother District Council. There has been a few cases of unpleasantness that has been reported to Sussex Police. I have the CAD numbers available. So my conclusion is we should be entitled to a place to live and thrive. This field is not suitable for development and has a negative impact on the environment and settled community and the high-wheeled national landscape. So I will join up with the parish council and on the conditions they wish to put on this. And I'd also insist on mains drainage is made available and screening from the A28. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Right, members may now ask the officer questions. Reminder, please, that this is question time. Try not to start discussions and try not to express your views and begin the debate until everyone's had a chance to ask questions. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to ask officers if what evidence we have of the cleaning water going into the pond. I note the objections talk about problems with the fish. Have we got any evidence of problems with the fish? And on the point about the adequacy of drainage, can you comment on the adequacy of drainage for this particular application? You know, is the drainage apposite for the site? Thank you.
One moment. I'm not singling you out, you happen to be the first, but because you were facing Edwin with all those questions, they weren't going into the microphone, so the four people at the back couldn't hear. So could I ask you please to do it again, but into the microphone?
Apologies,
everybody.
Sorry,
Nicola.
Yes, it's very tempting to look that way to the officer. So I had two questions. One was about the problem with cleaning water going into the pond and problems with the fish. So I was asking the officer if there, what evidence we have of cleaning water going into the ponds and what evidence we have of problems with the fish. And my follow-up question was around the adequacy of drainage for the site. what is the officer's view on what is appropriate drainage for a site like this, and is appropriate drainage included in this application?
Thank you, Councillor. Ed.
Thank you, Councillor. Just in relation to the evidence of issues with fish and smells, that no evidence has been tabled. It's just comments that have come in. I'm on the microphone, yes, sorry. In terms of evidence of any issues with the fish in the pond nearby and smells, we have no evidence provided to us. And in terms of the drainage, the applicant is using a packaged sewage treatment plant. This is for a small discharge, which is allowed, provided the general binding rules are met, and the onus is on the applicant to ensure that they meet the general binding rules. So from a planning point of view, we would be happy with the drainage arrangements that are on the site.
Thank you. Councillor Mear, then Councillor Mrs Barnes. Councillor Mear.
Yes, maybe a question for the lawyer as much as for Edwin Cook. And that's this. The gates themselves and the immediate metal fencing around the gate, shall we say, appear to me a little harsh and urban. Is it open to this committee, should we be minded to grant the application, to impose a condition as to planting in front of that fencing, or painting the railings a different colour, which would be more consistent with the rural location? It appears to be within the red line.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, provided the land in front of the gates is within the red edge of the site, then we could potentially add a condition on there to deal with landscaping in front of the fence. Yes.
Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. In the course of the report, it talks about the samples of materials being submitted so that they could be approved. And to my somewhat amazement, I discovered that they were. So that absolutely hideous white New England type building was deemed by officers to be suitable to be putting in this part of the vulnerable landscape. So I'd like to know why that was, and whether any care was taken in the design of the day room. Because I would have thought that certainly so near a listed building, we ought to be much more sensitive. In fact, we ought to be more sensitive altogether. But I would like to know why it is that that absolute horror story of the building was allowed permission to be there, the current proposal.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. A static caravan is a static mobile home caravan. It's, you know, there's not. They are what they are, unfortunately, and it was approved on the basis that a static caravan is allowed on the site.
Chairman, may I come back on that? It seems to me that we are making so many allowances for a group of people who we mustn't upset, so that we are actually bending our own rules in order to be able to give them planning permission. After all, we haven't got any other sites. We've got to be very careful here. The whole of this just seems to be handled so badly because, you know, they are people, we are people, but we are now looking at a decision that you have taken which actually is against what would be allowed anywhere else.
Yeah, I was going to say.
All I will say is we are talking about a group of people that it is a protected characteristic. So it's not, we're being careful not to upset them. They have protection. I'm going to ask a question now. It's only because in one of the objections, or I've read a couple of times, the suggestion that the stable block as part of the original one should have been demolished. I can't find that anywhere. Should the stable block as part and parcel of this be demolished? Or can it stand along with the new day room.
There was no requirement, thank you, Councillor, there was no requirement for the stable block to be demolished. There was a requirement for the previous mobile home on the site to be replaced.
Thank you. Councillor Gore. Councillor Groan. Sorry. The other one.
The other G. Yeah. Hi, Edwin. Under consultations, I just see it's Brede Parish Council, but I don't see any other consultative parties, consultees, I guess. When I read the objections, and this following on from Councillor McLaren's questions about fish and possible detergent contamination of ponds, was the environmental agency sort of contacted over this at all?
Thanks, Councillor. No, environmental health weren't consulted. They were consulted on the original application and had no objection to the scheme. No other consultees were consulted, such as the Highway Authority, because the site is as it was approved back in 2022 in terms of the access and visibility to the site. So we haven't reconsulted the previous consultees.
Councillor Stanger.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. Just how much weight, obviously I've read the report, but how much weight should members give to the proposed local plan allocation for the, if obviously all, it says limited weight, but...
It's a material consideration. The report sets out that it's limited weight, so it's for members to decide how they view that. Yeah.
The other thing is about the national landscape. How is the conflict outweighed?
So we're talking about the planning balance at paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework. Officers consider the harm, and we're not saying there's no harm, but the harm to the high weald landscape is localised and limited in this particular case. And we consider that the outstanding need for permanent gypsy and traveller pitches carries significant weight, which outweighs the harm to the landscape.
Last small, just something I wrote down. Has anything materially changed since the granting of the temporary permission in 2022?
As far as I'm aware, the site is as it was approved in 2022, apart from the replacement mobile home that was agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I come to Councillor Barnes again and Councillor Mear, I just wanted to ask, because in your report, a couple of times you said there was, or in answer to Councillor McLaren, you said there was no evidence, really the smells, the noise, etc., etc. Is that based on the fact that, as far as the council is concerned, there have been no formal complaints made to the council? Because that would amount to evidence rather than comments on the objector's side, if you see what I mean.
I'm not aware of any complaints that certainly planning have received. I couldn't comment in respect of environmental health.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Barnes, then Councillor Mear.
Yes, thank you. The permanent use of the land presumably means that for all time that site is a gypsy site. Is that right?
Yes, it would be a permanent permission, and it would not be a personal permission. If it was to count towards our need, then it would be a permanent permission for a gypsy and traveller pitch.
Which means that gypsy families can come and go on that site?
Yes.
Right. And can they always only use that part of what appears to be a very large field? Is the field in the blue line field, is that in the ownership of the family?
The blue line is within the applicant's ownership, yes. The red line to which the application and which any permanent permission would relate is the red line.
Does it have to go on that edge of the field?
That's what's being proposed and what we're considering.
Well, I suppose if I were desperate enough to want to live there, I would probably be asking if I could move somewhere else on my own land. Would that not be possible?
No, they've been living on that part of the land for the last 3 years, and there's no indication that they would like to change that. And if they did, then we would have to deal with it under planning a new application potentially.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Mear.
Yes, for the benefit of my colleague who wasn't present at the site visit, can you confirm that the height of the application site is considerably higher due to the lie of the land than the listed building next door?
I can certainly confirm that thank you, Councillor. I can certainly confirm that the land is at a higher level than the building and property to the south. But as members saw on site, there is a boundary fence, there is substantial screening on the site, and the listed building itself is well separated from the buildings that are on the site.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions, so the matter is now open for discussion. Councillor Stanger.
Yeah, just to add my comments from the visit on Tuesday, just for some people that couldn't come. It was very important to visit, I think, and to see, and it does look a very well kept kind of site, and the applicant has also left some vegetation that screens the caravan from the footpath that runs along where we're looking east, runs through the backwood. But no, yeah, it's kind of, I accept that obviously in the winter the vegetation will be gone, and then you probably could see more, but generally, and we did look in the drainage field and see if we could smell anything, and obviously we might have just been on a bad day or whatever, but just to reflect what we see when we visited anyway.
I'm just going to, just for my 2 pence worth, I don't give the inclusion of this site in the emerging local plan any weight whatsoever, because I suspect it's only in the local plan because it's a temporary one now, and the obvious thing is to include the temporary one into the local plan, emerging local plan, to make it permanent. So it's a self-fulfilling circle. So I give it no weight whatsoever. Councillor McLaren.
I suppose this might just be another question, but is it possible and feasible to set a condition that says that all wastewater is exclusively processed within the approved drainage system?
A little bit of thinking time there. Which one of you is going to do it? Oh, 1 minute. Councillor Brown might have a follow-up.
All right, I've just had a thought. Is it helpful if I add the word domestic? So if I say, no, I don't know about that actually. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Well, let's see what they say.
Let's see what they have to say.
Okay, all foul drainage in the proposal is detailed to discharge to this package treatment plant, which is bound by the general binding rules. It's any breach of it, so the enforcement body for a breach of the drainage would be the the Environment Agency. So if there was evidence that bath water was being discharged to the pond next door, it would be for the EA to investigate.
So just for absolute clarity, so bath water is described as foul
Yes.
drainage, yes?
Yes. And yeah, therefore, to answer your question about a condition, it wouldn't be reasonable for us to impose a condition because you'd be covering separate legislation in effect, and we have advised not to duplicate. So same with building regulations, legislation, we're not to duplicate. Same with anything else. So that, yeah, my discussion with Ed was just clarifying whose responsibility it is and just making sure there was no building control approval in this instance, not required, but it would be EA that is the enforcement body.
Councillor Stanger. I will come to you, Councillor Gordon, when the members have... Thank you.
Question again. So it's currently the sewage package that controls. Is that the raw sewage, like the toilet type stuff that controls? Does it? And then you'd have a grey water type, which you were on about a minute ago, which would be the bath and that. What goes in that at the moment?
We might want to bring the plan up, actually. I think the block plan shows where the connections are. But yes, essentially all grey foul water would be directed to the package treatment plant, which then processes that, cleans it to whatever level, and then discharges it via the drainage field.
So like suds through the kind of, yeah, it's similar. But yeah, so is it currently being used at the moment and it's in operation?
Yeah, I mean, members saw it
on
site.
I don't know how it works.
Our understanding is that it is operating. Essentially, yeah, foul and grey water from the bath or sinks will go through the package treatment plant, cleaned, for want of a better word, and then discharged to the drainage field.
And then the septic tank is emptied monthly, I think I read somewhere, is it?
There's no septic tank. There's no septic tank. It is the package treatment plant that has been confirmed as what they're using on the site.
So just for everyone's benefit, I appreciate you cannot see the annotations on the screen. The large black rectangle to the right-hand side is the mobile home. There is a blue dashed line coming from that going to a blue circle, which is annotated as an 8-person sewage treatment plant. There is also a blue dashed line from that to the proposed day room that has not yet been built. From the package, from the sewage treatment plant, there is a dashed blue line down to a large rectangle dashed in blue, and that is annotated as an 80-metre square drainage field. So that is for the, I believe, the clean water from the treatment plant to
ground.
To ground, yes. To soak away. I can try and zoom in.
Talk again.
Talk again?
Yeah, talk again. Say what you just said.
Oh, will that help, Councillor Barnes? So, no, mobile home. So large black rectangle is the mobile home. That blue circle, package treatment plant or treatment plant. The small rectangle there, that's the day room.
Where is the discharge field?
the blue dashed rectangle, that's 80 square, that's where the clean processed water from the package plant. And also, page 9 of the report. Thank you, Kirsty. So that plan, if you go to page 9 of the report, the plan is there. Yeah, well, yeah. I have the same issues.
I'll come to Councillor Stanger. Councillor Gordon, I will come to you. That's in my prerogative as chair, because you are the ward member, and I will come to you. But I'll come to you after the members have finished their bits. Give them first dibs. So, Councillor Stanger.
Yeah, I thought I see septic tanks over there, but it says in 7.15.1, it does say about septic tank and empty.
Councillor Stanger, sorry. Into the microphone.
Sorry.
Do a little bit slower, please.
Sorry, I apologise. Yeah, so I thought I'd read a septic tank, and if you look at 7.15.1, it says additional information from the applicant has been submitted confirming a septic tank is in place and emptied monthly.
Okay, so that is the officer's assessment in relation to the committee report in 2022. If you then read on to the second paragraph, it has since been confirmed that a sewage treatment plant for up to 8 persons has been installed on the site with discharge to the drainage field. Correct.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Barnes, are you yes, no?
Yes. I have to say, Chairman, I'm really not happy about this at all. I'm not happy on behalf of the owner of the house, of the parish council who are having to put up with this. The fact that it's actually right on top of them, they can't get away from it. The whole thing smacks as something that it's unavoidable because we have got to vote for it. But I don't want to vote for it. I really don't want to see this disruption in other people's lives. I really feel that there's got to be an answer to this. And the only one that I can come up with right at this moment is to give them another couple of years until we've got our local plan in place. But I certainly don't want to see this becoming a permanent site. I think that would be absolutely disastrous. So, if it came to that, that is what I would be in favour of. And that is, we've examined everything we can about the water, which is unpleasant. Doesn't the village have mains drainage? Why do they have to have a package plant? Why, there's just so many things about this that I'm not happy about.
Councillor Barnes, I'll say what I think my interpretation, and obviously Kirsty or Matt will come to it, but to my mind, someone at some stage was going to suggest another temporary application, but the application before us is for it to be permanent, so we either, I believe, have to say yay or no to permanence. We cannot put in another temporary. We would have to say no, and the applicant would have to come back for another temporary. Am I right?
Yes, so the description of the development is removal/variation of conditions imposed on planning permission to allow for a permanent change of use of the land for the stationing of one static mobile home and one touring caravan, and proposed erection of one day room or for gypsy travel occupation. That's distinct as opposed to it saying for the stationing of one, so it refers to a permanent change of use.
And so, I'll just come to you. So, to my mind, if we said no to this today, that doesn't automatically become a temporary because their temporary has expired. They would have to reapply for another temporary application. Am I right? Councillor Barnes, then Councillor Groner, then Councillor Gray.
I would like to propose refusal.
I'll come back to you for the grounds on that, but I did have a couple of others who still want to discuss, but I'll come back to you with the grounds for that, and then we can get it seconded. Councillor Groner, then Councillor Gray. Councillor Groner.
Thank you, Chair. Just just as a side thing, in previous applications in the committee's heard, have we not rejected one proposal and then put forward an amendment to it? Or am I getting confused? Why is this a yes or no?
Again, Kirsty can come in on this, because this is not an application for the siting of a caravan, because that was dealt with previously. Right. This is an application to make it permanent. So it has to be a yes or no. Yeah, okay. It has to be a yes or no to the change. Then
I'll get to the main debate then. So, I think Councillor Stanger actually nailed it very succinctly when he asked what has changed, because this is another five-sided, Rubik's Cube that, we ultimately involve children. I noticed the officer went to the ECHR in here, so it really broadens the arguments, for what we can consider and what should be considered. I think the development boundary, that doesn't change. The very strongly felt opinion of the only consultee, which is Breed Parish Council, has not changed and is considerable there. It is still in the AONL. It hasn't moved, right? What has changed? Well, loss of privacy, I'm not sure if that's a new thing, but if that's a new thing, then that's an even greater concern, because you can protect the rights of certain people, and that's absolutely right. And we've done that previously, I believe, because of the welfare of children, which is almost not a planning issue, but has to be considered very, very strongly, and has been. But loss of privacy is somebody else's right. So I think that pushes it again, where I think we ultimately get down to the allocations of sites being fed into something where there's enormous pressure on this council to come up with the sites. We don't even know what the future of this council is. We won't probably get to see that plan signed off. So there's not enough of an argument to justify this. Nothing significantly has changed in order to justify this recommendation, in my mind. So I would be very happy to follow Councillor Barnes if it was another type of application. We were allowed to table an amendment. However, it isn't, and therefore I would support Councillor Barnes's recommendation and
we'll come back to that.
Vote refusal.
Yeah, you won't miss out. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Edwin, for a very helpful report and for the site visit. I just wanted to remind us about the children. On page 25, 714.1, it states that there are 3 young children, 2 at local primary school and 1 at the secondary school. So these children are likely to be in school age for, many years to come. And I do think for these children to have continuing uncertainty of where they live, we know there is a desperate need for these kind of sites. I know from the local plan that's just being formulated, we are desperate for these places. If we don't accept this one, I don't know where this family would go. They'd have to leave the whole area. So that's the point I wanted to make. We need to consider the welfare of the family.
Councillor Stanger.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few things really for officers. Obviously, Mike probably is. Chances of appeal. Obviously, we've already agreed the principle of potentially a type of this site on the site, and so how do we stand fair? And would we create homelessness? So, is that a factor we should take into consideration? What are the likelihoods of an appeal?
Thank you, Councillor. Officers have considered all the issues in the committee report, and the application is to be determined in accordance with paragraph 11D of the framework. I think we've made it clear that we feel, yes, there will be harm to the landscape, but in this particular case, given our lack of permanent pitches and the need for them to be delivered, that would carry significant weight in this case. And our position is that, chances of appeal I don't think would be good.
Councillor McLaren.
Yeah, sorry, just because that was quite quick, Edwin. Just please re-summarise your view on the chances of the council losing an appeal were we to refuse this today.
Yeah, I'll reread the section in the report. So, in this case, the granting of a permanent permission would help to address the district's outstanding need for permanent gypsy and traveller pitches, and it is material that the site is proposed to be allocated, although you'll take your own view on that in an emerging local plan. It's also relevant that the family falls within the definition of a gypsy and traveller family. The personal circumstances of the family remain the same, and this carries significant weight in the planning balance. In terms of our local policy LHN6, the site is not located in a nature conservation designated area or in an area at risk from flooding. It's not in close proximity to the source protection zone, or it's not significantly contaminated land. Moreover, the site is in a sustainable location with good access to local services and facilities, which can all be reached by foot. There are adequate site access and parking arrangements in place, and this was confirmed by the Highway Authority in 2022. There are adequate drainage arrangements in place. Officers do not consider that the proposal gives rise to any significant adverse impacts on living conditions of neighbours, and officers do not consider that the proposal harms the setting of the neighbouring Grade 2 listed building. We do acknowledge that there would be harm to the landscape and scenic beauty of the countryside, but it wouldn't be significant harm, and we believe it to be localised and limited. And on balance, the overall need for permanent gypsy and traveller pitches in the district outweighs the limited harm to the landscape beauty.
Councillor McLaren and Councillor
I'm sorry if it's just me, but I'm trying to get an assessment of, from your point of view, how finely balanced is this, or is this one where you feel, compared, doing the balance, that there's a significant risk of the council losing on appeal?
So, as per the report, we haven't said it's finely balanced. We've said on balance, so we consider it's not a finely balanced decision in our opinion. We feel that at appeal, the applicant would have a good chance of success.
Councillor Mear, then Councillor Groner.
First of all, Chair, just an observation. I know we can't grant a temporary permission today, but an advantage of that would, of course, have been that by the time the temporary permission expired, we would know what the outcome of the new local plan was as regards the allocation of this site. And that would have been immensely helpful. And it would also mean that the allocations process would proceed with a clear mind. It's unfortunate that we can't do that. The other thing I would propose is that, as I said earlier, if we are to grant permission, could we please make it with a condition that officers agree a suitable planting and painting plan for the gates?
Yeah, we're going to deal, eventually we're going to deal with Councillor Barnes' thing first, but yes, that's noted. Councillor Groner.
Yeah, I just want to put it on the record that if we are going to vote against officers' recommendation, it is because there is no alternative. And it's not an unreasonable decision. I just want that stated on the record, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes, I'm going to come back to you shortly for your reasons for refusal, but I said I'd let Councillor Gordon say something. Councillor Gordon, it's with some trepidation I do, because it's not usual, but I use every opportunity to have councillors contribute to the thing, but please don't go on to a 5-minute speech.
I don't normally,
Just a few comments.
Thank you very much, Chair, for letting me say something. Just to point out, there is mains drainage available, and it's 30 metres from the mains drainage. So I believe environmental rules actually do stipulate that you should be connected to the mains planning officers. And secondly, let's not forget this is high-wheeled national landscape. big, important thing that Rother has signed up to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes, you were going to propose that we refuse. Sorry. Oh, I didn't see you behind Councillor Stanger. Councillor Mr. Barnes.
About conditions, because it does seem to me that it would be very normal for a permanent site to actually have to have, in terms of the MPF, a mains drainage connection. So can the debate not forget conditions when they're discussing the decision?
Indeed, thank you, Councillor Barnes. And you see, Councillor Gordon, you open the floodgate and they all come in. But we will take that into consideration if we get to that stage, because at the moment, Councillor Mrs. Barnes is going to propose that we refuse the officer's recommendation and we refuse this application, and she's now going to give us reasons why.
But first of all, I would like to say, why did no one find out that there was mains drainage available and letting these people go on causing mayhem to their neighbours? Right, so the reasons that I have are very fortunately in front of me from Brede Parish Council. And I have to say, I do agree with, I mean, I can pick any of these at random, really, but I think I'll go for the scale and dominance is too big for the rural setting and is overdevelopment of the site. The boundary, it is outside the permitted boundary. There is a problem with light pollution. So much activity going on there is bound to be will cause light pollution. We don't know anything at all at the moment about the construction of the day room, so I don't know how we can vote for something which we haven't seen. When shall I stop? I mean, do you want me to go on?
I'll come to Matt, but I'm just going to listen to Kirsty, because I know with any reasons for granting or refusing, we try to keep to a couple of key ones, so that it's not a pepper pot or blunderbuss. One moment, I was going to speak to Kirsty. Yeah, it's the quality of the reasons rather than the quantity. And I know you were of a mind to second. Well, I thought you were, but if you want to help, yes, that's what I'm going to say. Please feel free to contribute.
If I may contribute, I don't know if this is a read, but from reading this report, it seems that the applications on this site have been rejected numerous times, and the last one was only temporary. So, on the grounds that it was never been granted before, for the reasons outset, is that not reason in itself? It might be a circular argument, but that's a Kirsty special.
Well,
harm to the high wheeled
and of course,
natural landscape.
And I know what you're thinking about the harm, because whilst possibly we accepted temporary harm, this would be permanent harm.
Yeah.
Somewhere along those lines.
Permanent.
But I was just going to answer, I presume it's not connected to the mains now, because if you only had a temporary permission, would you bother connecting to the mains? So I suspect that may be behind it.
Chairman, they've been there for 3 years.
Yeah, but it was temporary. Without this, they were going to have to be going. Well, I'm just going to see what Matt
Can I add one more?
is thinking. Go on.
Well, I still am a little concerned that if there were so many objections about contamination or pollution of a local water source, that a consultee like the EA was not consulted. So that, I find, is a problem in the report.
That may well not be a reason for refusal, but it would be something that would have to be looked at and included in the report, I suspect. Councillor Mear.
It's a question, really. If this had been an application for an ordinary domestic house, would the packaged sewage system have been acceptable under current legislation? I have an idea that new houses are not allowed to connect to packaged systems. Am I wrong about that?
In terms of the drainage hierarchy, then ideally if there is a main sewer in the vicinity that can be connected to, that is the first port of call. If that's not possible, then you go through the drainage hierarchy and a package treatment plant would then become the next means of drainage.
So it's possible, but not the first, certainly not the first choice. And the second observation would be that if we were to think that that were a determining factor or a major factor in our decision, then I think we should bear in mind that an application which is otherwise unacceptable can be made acceptable by the imposition of conditions. And rather than reject outright, we should consider whether to impose a condition about connection to the mains drainage. I'm not actually saying that I personally would necessarily go along that line, but I know that other councillors are discussing.
No, but thank you, Councillor. Yeah, that was very useful. Councillor Stanger.
Yes, obviously they haven't asked for it, but would it be how much it cost? It would cost a lot of money for the applicant. I'm just saying in the sense of connection, 30 metres. I'm not feeling sorry for the applicant. I'm just would it be unreasonable to say we had to condition something that's going to cost 100 grand or something? I don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying if we could condition it. But is it possible?
I would warn against. I mean, we've got a motion. We've got a refusal motion to deal with before anything else. I would warn against imposing such a condition. I think it would fail the tests. Or at least we'd need to investigate whether it was possible, whether, like Ed said, it's in line with the drainage hierarchy. I haven't got the answers here now, so it would have to, I don't know, be dealt with some way.
So for now, we'll concentrate on Councillor Barnes's proposal and see what the outcome of that is before we say anything else.
Well,
yes, I'm going to come to you now.
Yes, I listened to everything you said, Councillor Barn, Councillor Groan and other comments, and I just, well, as usual, I like to summarise what I've heard, so I've got it right. I think, yeah, quality over quantity is always the right way to go. From what you've said, I've heard one reason for refusal there, relating to this being a countryside site outside the development boundary, within the High Weald National Landscape, and permanent harm would be caused to the landscape and scenic beauty, including light pollution and the dark night sky. And you also made comments about scale and dominance that could be incorporated into that.
Can I also add the effect on the listed building? Because we've always considered nearby listed building as something important in our determination.
Right, that would be a separate reason. So you're happy with what I've summarised for the first reason. Second, in terms of harm to, so the listed building next door, I believe we've described it as having a rural setting, largely undeveloped field to the north. You're saying the permanent development, including car park and parked vehicles and other structures, would be harmful. Urbanisation of the rural setting.
Yes, I think it's important because 3 years ago that house was living by itself in comparative peace and quiet. and it has now had a very inconvenient set of things going on. I won't say inconvenient neighbours, but just inconveniences with the coming and going, all the rest of it. And I think it's had an unfortunate, will have had a very poor effect on that house. I'm glad the house isn't mine.
Take a different view, like they are with the, well, obviously the planning.
So what that brief discussion was about was, of course, the officer's report says, for the above reasons, the proposal does not harm the setting of the neighbouring Grade 2 listed building. You're saying it does.
I'm saying it affects the life of the people in the.
That's different.
That's different.
That's different to the building.
Councillor, sorry, yeah, we need to be really clear here. So there's legislation, Section 66 of the Conservation and Listed Buildings Act requires us to have special regard to the listed building and its setting, as well as planning policies. So that is assessing the setting of the listed building. So countryside setting, surrounded by fields, high weald, the living conditions of the occupier of that building are managed via separate conditions. So we've got policy OSS4 in the course strategy, is it criteria 3? Relates to neighbours' living conditions. So if there was a specific issue there, that would have to have to be a third reason for refusal.
I think basically Matt's saying they're neighbours, they're not listed neighbours. They're neighbours. Separately to that is the listed building.
So it's just,
the neighbours.
Just need clarity off you that, I mean, I heard you talking about the rural setting of the listed building, which is fine if you've got concerns over that. But if you're talking about living conditions, you would just need to draw that out and give, how is it harmful to the living conditions? I think in the discussion there was mention of the kitchen windows.
Yeah.
Proximity to the car park.
Dogs barking, certainly.
Don't do that. Loss of privacy.
So loss of privacy to neighbour, especially in winter months.
On the basis that only you can understand your scribble, Matt, I'm going to ask you to repeat those in a moment so that Councillor Barnes is happy that that's what she's proposing. And
Well, I was happy before, and then all of a sudden I discovered I had to abide by
you've lost all track. So we'll get Matt to repeat it so that you're happy with it, and then anyone who's seconding you would be agreeable to it as well. So over to you, Matt.
I have to read my scribble now. So, reason 1, the development by reason of its scale and dominance in a countryside setting outside of a development boundary as defined in the core strategy would cause harm, permanent harm to the High Weald National Landscape, including the dark night sky by reason of light pollution, contrary to the relevant legislation and policies. Yeah?
1, 2.
2, proposed permanent development would have an urbanising impact on the rule setting of the neighbouring Grade 2 listed building, contrary to relevant legislation, relevant planning policies. Reason 3, the proposed development, by reason of its proximity to the shared boundary, would cause an unacceptable loss of privacy to the occupiers of the neighbouring property, especially in the winter months when the boundary screening is devoid of leaves, contrary to policy OSS 43 and any other relevant development plan policies.
Matt, did development boundary come into this?
It did, in fact,
Very early on. And I'm just going to, before I put it out for a second, I'm just going to say, because I'm in between Matt and Kirsty, and I think Matt was really hoping Kirsty was going to go yes or no.
Well,
right, so is there a seconder for that proposal after all that? Thank you, Councillor Groner. So we're now, so the matter is open for debate. If anyone wants to debate it, I know we've discussed it, but once the motion's been made, it's open for debate, during which the rules of only one speaking only once apply. Does anyone want to speak? No? Okay, we'll go to the vote then. So we're voting on refusing the application contrary to the officer's recommendation for the reasons that have just been stated. All those in favour, please show clearly. That's 2-4. All those against, please show. And that was 6 against. So that is lost. That, of course, doesn't automatically mean that we are saying yes to it. There has to be a separate proposal to support the officer's recommendations, and that would be where it would be appropriate to mention the extra conditions that people were mentioning in the discussion. Councillor Stanger.
Yeah, I'm not going to propose anything now, but I just I find it really difficult because you can see why people. Be careful how I say things, but you can see why people are disgruntled with things and how the whole process works with a certain type of application. And I'm not treading on anyone's toes, and I can understand all the kind of how does it work versus a dwelling and blah blah blah. But it's very difficult. I just have to in my mind that we lose on appeal, and it's that kind of. And they've been there for years, and it's difficult, isn't it? But someone has to live somewhere, and it's impossible. And we're up against what rules we have to work with, so that's just where I'm at. Don't mean I haven't pushed anything forward because I'm not overly keen on it, but also we are a reality of where we are.
There's nothing to second Councillor Gray because he didn't propose any. Unusually for Councillor Stanger, he didn't propose anything. No. Sorry, I'm just thinking.
I've come to a conclusion.
Go on, Councillor Stanger.
I'd like to propose based on, it's really tough, but I think we can't really, there's nothing else to propose, we can't amend, we can't do a lot with it. And I think everything has been looked at to the best of its ability. It's not ideal, but we are where we are, in my opinion, so I move the officer's recommendation.
Just before I look for a seconder for that, though, you said we can't change anything. Yes, we can. And I come back to Councillor Mears' conditions about the fencing and the gates. We're already talking about adding 2 anyway verbally that the officer mentioned about the lighting and the no sleeping in the day room. We've also had someone suggest, I think something else, what was it? I know we've been advised against trying to put it into the main sewer because that might create problems. So, but we can change
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't, you can't kind of, we can't ask them to go back to temporary, or we can't do, like, the change was more meant to that, I wasn't on about actually that. But yeah, condition that they, aesthetically, they sort the gates out and landscape the front.
Yeah, we'll get to a bit more solid wording on that one. Councillor Crone.
Yeah, well, any condition that sort of enhances the privacy of the residents and the neighbourhood residents.
So it would be a bit unfair to ask the officers, I think, to list them necessarily, but I'm going to start with, if this is okay with you, Councillor Stangen, I know I've not had a seconder yet, but with Councillor Mears' suggestion, what was it specifically about the gates and the fencing? Was it colours as well as screening?
It was that councillors should conclude a condition as to planting of suitable vegetation in front of the railings by the gates, and that the gates themselves should be painted a suitable colour consistent with the rural location, preferably green.
So what that discussion is, that would become a landscaping condition, and that could be, and I suspect other things might be added to it during this discussion, but that would be a landscaping condition on the planting and the colours of the gates. Councillor Stanger.
Yeah, we're happy to add relevant conditions which strengthen it. And also, if I know you are adding a landscape condition, is there any way, without being overly onerous on the applicant, to perennial type plants along that edge where the house is, so then they could not, even in the winter, you're still going to have some kind of, there is some kind of landscaping that will have perennial kind of, some kind of, not many.
No, I'm not sure if onerous to the applicants is necessarily a concern. It would
Well, no, you don't want to
connected
keep, you want to put 100 conditions on.
connected to the mains, but the purpose of a condition is to make something that was unacceptable acceptable. So
well, I know we have to be
that's the
reasonable
main
as well.
focus.
We have to be reasonable as well. Don't we? And also, what I was going to say, regarding the one pitch, can we tie that up in legal knots virtually to ensure that is it a section 106? How do we really strengthen that so it's only one pitch and it is then protected the rest of the field legally?
The application is for one pitch.
Yeah, I know, but it could be otherwise go down the enforcement route, and you know how successful that is.
Anything else would need to be anything else would need to be a separate application for planning permission. This is the red area for one pitch consisting of one mobile home, one touring caravan and a day room to be built, which might yet become a part of a condition somewhere.
Is there a way we could protect the rest of that field in perpetuity? Where it's, I know we do at some planning, at some kind of developments where they create a water thing or a park or something, and it can never be built on that area.
Just going historically, that I thought we've always said what we do is within the red boundary. Anything that's outside the red boundary is in the lap of the gods and not us.
All it was is trying to reassure the concerned people a little bit more if we can really tie it up, but yes, we're all right.
And of course, the officer's recommendation also includes, as well as adding the one about the lighting and the day room, also the original removes 10, the size of the caravan, the size of the mobile home, because that's dealt with in other legislation and isn't necessary. But are there any other, because I've not gone for a seconder yet, but it's to make these reasons the best you can. Even when you're agreeing to an officer's recommendation, you can still add to it, and we're adding conditions about the landscaping. Is there anything else that we think would make it acceptable?
Have we done lighting?
Lighting is going to be on the new one, is the one that Ed said was going to be introduced to it on lighting, external lighting, to protect the skies. There was reference in the original one that was temporary to lighting, but that was buried somewhere in a landscape environmental pack. But this is a single specific one on lighting that Ed was proposing today. Councillor Stanger.
Only just quickly, obviously the officers wrote the report and they know what they're on about the conditions, but is there anything they would see that could strengthen any part of the concerns before it moves to final vote? That's what I was just asking. Obviously, not that you haven't done an extensive report, I'm just thinking just anything you can think of that would tighten things up as best possible to try to alleviate any...
Can I say, while they're thinking about that, it's the converse of what Councillor Barnes put in her reasons, which is, can we not strengthen the boundary between the site and Kingswood Land, the listed 2 building? Can we not do something there to make those trees, I mean, God forbid Leadlandii, but is there something we can do with the planting there to help screen? Because you can't flatten the land is higher and it will overlook, but is there something we can do condition-wise to prevent that overlooking being worse in the winter than it is in the summer?
Chairman, what about specifying non-deciduous trees?
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor. If we have a general landscaping condition on there, officers can agree appropriate landscaping when the details come in. If they're not acceptable when they come in, we can ask for amended details to be provided.
Just to respect to the applicant, they have put in stuff from you before when we went to the site. There's quite a lot of landscaping already in place in it, but some of it's not growing very fast.
Accepting what the officer said there about a landscape lets you do it, but of course we're letting you know our thoughts of what should be in it.
Chair, was there a question over the position of the mobile caravan? It's such a long debate, I forget.
I don't remember it being brought up.
The proximity to the boundary of the mobile?
I mean, members saw it at the visit. It's not on the boundary. It's set into the site away from the boundary, and it's located away from the quite far away from the neighbouring dwelling. I think over 30 metres away from the dwelling itself. And so, actually, it's next to the large pond to the south, if anything.
So, Councillor, without any other suggestion, but it might come to you. So, Councillor Stanger is proposing accepting the recommendation, which involves removing condition 10, but also adding the conditions that we've just discussed. Is there a seconder for that, please? Councillor Gray, thank you. The matter is now open for debate. Yes. If I didn't open it for debate, you'd say, oh, I didn't have a chance.
But, I'm happy to move with the amendments and delegated authority to office.
We're moving then to a vote on accepting the officer's recommendation which includes the removal of condition 10 in the original, which includes adding the conditions on the day room and the lighting and the landscaping. And as I said that, I just remembered something that I'd said during it, which is the plan for the day room is in there. Are the materials acceptable, or should that be subject to an agreement by the local authority?
We have a condition regarding details of the day room.
Yeah, thank you. I thought we would have, but I've lost the plot. So, with that in mind, seconded by Councillor Gray, all those in favour, please show. That is 6-4. All those against? 1 abstaining? 1. That is carried. Thank you. There will now be a 20-minute break in the meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back to June's Planning Committee, Rother District Council. We now move on to agenda item 8, which is application RR 2026/0257/506. It's Conkers Main Street, Iden, and the proposal is for a deed of variation to remove the requirement for the affordable home housing provision. The recommendation is it be resolved to agree to a deed of variation to remove the requirement for affordable housing provision, subject to the inclusion of a late-stage viability review mechanism to secure a contribution towards affordable housing provision if the scheme's viability has improved. The officer in this one is Edwin Cork again. The local councillors are Councillor Hacking and Councillor Osborne, who I don't see online. And the reason is because it's the loss of the affordable housing provision. It's not subject to the public speaking scheme, and therefore Ed will present his report and then we will be able to question him on it. Ed, if you please.
Thank you, Chair. Another verbal update on this item. Since the committee report was published, we've had one additional objection to the removal of affordable housing provision. Okay, so this proposed modification of a planning obligation relates to a site located west of Main Street and south of Elmsmead and Iden, and it has planning permission for development of 15 dwellings, 3 of which are affordable units. The development has not yet commenced and the permission remains extant. Permission was granted in October 2025 following consideration of the scheme by the Planning Committee in October 2024. The associated planning obligation secures 3 affordable units equating to 20% on-site affordable housing provision. This reduced provision, down from the policy requirement for 40%, was demonstrated to be acceptable on viability grounds. The proposed modification is to remove the requirement for affordable housing provision entirely on viability grounds. If agreed, the modification would be executed as a deed of variation. The relevant policy in this case is DHG1 of the Rother Development and Site Allocations Local Plan, and this does allow for reduced affordable housing provision where this is demonstrated on viability grounds. Okay. The applicant has submitted a viability assessment in support of the proposed modification, and this concludes that the housing scheme is unviable even as 100% market housing, with an overall negative headroom of just over £500,000. The main reason for this is a softening of sales values alongside continued increases in build costs. The applicant's viability assessment has been reviewed by an independent consultant on behalf of the council, and it is agreed that no affordable housing is likely to be achievable within this unviable scheme. The viability test at policy DHG1 has therefore been passed, and on this basis there is no objection to the proposed modification of the obligation to remove the requirement for affordable housing provision. Members are advised that the loss of affordable housing will be partly offset by the SIL that will now be liable on the 3 units that were previously affordable. The applicant has also agreed to the inclusion of a late-stage viability review mechanism, which would secure a contribution towards affordable housing provision if the scheme's viability has improved. As it remains the case that the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing and the development will no longer deliver any on-site affordable housing provision, the assessment of the housing scheme against the second point at paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework is revisited. In this regard, the benefits associated with the housing development include an additional 15 dwellings will help to significantly boost the supply of housing in the district. The development represents a suitably high quality design, will retain and enhance the pond on the site, and will retain and reinforce the boundary planting with additional trees and shrubs. There will be short-term benefits to the construction industry and further economic benefits from the spend of future occupants. There will be upgrades to the existing northbound and southbound bus stops nearby, and there will be a financial contribution of £16,500 towards a demand-responsive transport service or towards providing additional provision on the conventional bus service. And just in relation to matters such as impact and character and appearance of the area, accessibility, highway and transport impacts, etc., the planning conditions that currently exist and the planning obligation make the development acceptable in planning terms. Against this, the scheme will now no longer deliver any on-site affordable housing provision, although this has been demonstrated to be acceptable on viability grounds, and that's in accordance with the development plan. It would also cause less than substantial harm to the significance of 4 Grade 2 listed buildings. However, the public benefit of delivering 15 dwellings outweighs this less than substantial harm. Overall, the adverse impacts of the housing scheme do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the National Planning Policy Framework taken as a whole. On this basis, the recommendation is to agree to the proposed modification of the planning obligation to remove the requirement for affordable housing provision, but that's subject to the inclusion of the late stage viability review mechanism to secure a contribution towards affordable housing provision if the viability of the scheme improves. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Any questions? Again, it's question time. It's not discussion or debate. Councillor Groan.
Sorry, I don't know if this was on the site visit, which I didn't attend. Has this been built?
No.
This is still a proposed development?
It's been granted planning permission, but not yet been built.
Not, yeah, right, okay. And I guess I can't query like why materials have gone up since 2024 when they've been going down. So how does that work? Can we query any of the mechanisms? No, because it's an outside consultant and what they say is golden, right?
The applicant submitted their viability assessment, which had the increased build costs in, and we had that independently assessed by our own consultant, and they agreed that building costs have gone up.
Councillor Stanger.
Yeah, it's a question, but it's obviously when it was first agreed and I was part of the site visit and the previous decision, obviously the public benefit was part of the original decision. Obviously the 20%, which it should have been 40% in the first place anyway, but we agreed 20%, which we see the public benefit of that for that village of Iden to help with their housing need. So has the planning balance changed significantly due to that? Or so that's what I'm trying to get at, because obviously when we agreed it was a lot of balance on the affordable, even though it was less than what we wanted for the people of Iden and the surrounding areas. So because the public benefit is removed, because Market House, does that come into public benefit? Yeah, but not certain, obviously not as a housing need.
The loss of affordable housing, it is obviously a public benefit, and it should be considered in the planning balance. But in this particular case, they have demonstrated it in accordance with the relevant policy in the development plan that they cannot provide affordable housing provision. And so whilst they're no longer able to do that, we also have to still bear in mind the other public benefits of the proposal or benefits of the scheme. And it would still deliver 15 dwellings, which, given our housing and land supply position, is still given significant weight for the proposal. And I also mentioned the other benefits that the scheme will deliver as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Groner.
Sorry, it was a question I forgot to ask before. You may or may not know the answer. In the viability assessment, are the financing costs a legitimate sort of deduction? Are they? Is profit after the deduction of financing costs? Is probably the correct way of asking.
All the relevant information has been provided by in the applicant's viability assessment, including finance costs, and it's all been reviewed by our independent consultant.
Yeah, so the financing cost gets deducted before the profit comes in. Is that regarded as a cost of build? Does that contribute towards the cost of the development before profit calculation?
It would have been...
It's a bit of a wider question, and I do
Without
apologise.
going over double checking the viability review, I can't answer that, but it would have been it would have been done properly because our consultant assesses viability assessments having regard to the what's outlined in the plan and practice guidance for best practice.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions before I come to you, Councillor Barnes. My understanding, because I know it's sort of been touched on, it's been touched on in some of the objections, is that we're being asked this simple question about the affordable housing. The planning permission is still there. We can't say today, well, because you haven't done that, we're going to take away the planning position. That is not an option. You can say yay or nay. If we say no to this, A, can they appeal? And B, do we risk them not being built at all if we said no to this?
The answers are, my understanding is that there is no right of an appeal against a proposed deed of variation. So it would just be a no. And in terms of whether the scheme is built out, possibly not, but that's a decision for the developer.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes and Councillor Mear.
Chairman, I'm slightly confused. Deed of variation, where did that come into it?
So this relates to, we granted the planning permission subject to a legal agreement, the planning obligation, and they are proposing to amend the planning obligation or modify the planning obligation, and the way they do that is by a deed of variation. It's called a deed of variation. So they effectively they were proposing to remove any reference to affordable housing provision from the legal agreement, and the way of doing that is a deed of variation.
Which under the terms of our own constitution, can we do that? I mean, we are supposed to be providing mixed housing.
In terms of the planning regime, yes, that is possible to do, provided it's justified on planning grounds.
And has any effort been made to find any small housing associations, like, for example, Hasto, that would take on a few houses in order that the village will get some affordable housing?
My understanding is from a housing officer that's sort of the number of units that are currently being proposed as affordable, i.e. free, it's too small for providers to take on.
Then why is the builder insist on building unsaleable private housing?
I can't answer that question. It'll be a market decision for them whether they want to proceed with the development or not. The viability review shows I'll explain a little bit more. The viability review shows that the developer would make. They're required to make, for planning purposes, a profit of between 15 to 20% in terms of their return for developing a site.
Who in the housing market is going to be able to guarantee that these days?
Well, again, it's down to the developer whether they wish to pursue the scheme or not on viability grounds or profit grounds.
Councillor Mear and Councillor Stanger.
Yes, I just want clarification on something. I'm not suggesting that what I'm going to say is relevant in this case, because I was present on the earlier occasion and I rather liked the proposal and the development and voted in favour of it. And I think I will still be in favour of it without the affordable housing, if so it has to be. I'm disappointed that it's not been built. It was proposed to us as a ready-to-go scheme, and we now find that it's said to be totally unviable. But I wanted to pick up on the point that Councillor Stanger made, and that is whether, supposing this had been an unsuitable development, or, for example, policy had changed against it in the intervening period, or we were a new committee and considered things differently, whether we would be entitled to reject this in its entirety. because that was the advice we received in another case some years ago in Fairlight, and we did indeed reject it. The inspector allowed it on appeal, but that particular issue was not raised.
I'll take this because I'm somewhat familiar with the development in Fairlight. So I think it's two different processes. So the application in Fairlight was a variation of the planning application, variation of conditions. This is a deed of variation. So it's they are seeking to vary the section 106, not the conditions on the planning application.
I'm sorry, I thought the section 106 was a condition that 106 agreement would be entered into.
Do you want to respond, Cassie?
So obviously, a Section 106 agreement is used where we're providing affordable housing, financial contributions, highway works, etc. On this one, it was granted subject to a 106 agreement. The 106 agreement has been completed. That runs with the land, it's binding on successors in title. So the only way you can vary a 106 agreement, which is a deed of variation because it was less than 5 years old when the original 106 agreement was granted. So the deed of variation is a supplementary agreement to the original 106. The remainder of the terms of the 106 will stay standing, subject to the variation that's made by the 106. So it's just a way of affecting the provision of obligations as opposed to conditions. So you've got 106 agreement, planning obligations as opposed to planning conditions, and that's the distinction.
But the condition in the Fairlight case was as to the provision of affordable housing. So it seems to be a distinction without a difference as far as I can see, but of course legally that may well be the case.
Thank you. Councillor Stanger.
When they come back, so obviously they agreed to 106, so was there any alternatives like off-site contributions for affordable, anything like that? Anything they could, potentially one unit, something, because I know other ones have at least gone down to one or off-site contributions or something where they're just trying to get out of all of it. And
I think you'll find that's the reason, the late stage.
So then we can reassess once they've built them, and then we can try and claw some money back, which is what's the realistic prospects?
It might happen.
That's the market.
Councillor McLaren.
I haven't been on this committee for very long, but I'm sick of this.
You've actually been here longer.
So we're in a loop here where you bring forward a planning application. It has a section 106 for affordable housing, which is very, very important to every single person on this committee. We agree it, then a while passes where nothing's happened, and then we're asked to do a deed of variation. And my understanding last time we did this was there's very little we can do about it. We have to say yes. Yeah? So it's just like, what's the point?
So your question is, what can we do?
So my question is, if we say no to this deed of variation, what are the potential comebacks on the council?
There is, because this is a deed of variation and the section 106 is less than 5 years old, there is no right of appeal. So the risk is to the council that this does not get built. Can I just query? Right. Needed to clarify with Kirsty, they could JR a judicial review, so there could be a legal challenge on the point of law if this is not considered properly. So if you were to disagree, we'd need planning reasons.
What? Councillor Graham.
We were just advised that there was no appeal process for the deed of variation.
There is
They're
not.
now subject to a
It's
judicial
two.
review.
There isn't.
So-
But separately, judicial review isn't an appeal. It's where someone thinks we've done something wrong in our reaching the decision, because the question is on no. So if we were wrong to say no for whatever reason,
So this is a pointless vote, is what we're saying.
So obviously, normally an applicant will have a right of appeal to PINS, to the Planning Inspectorate, and we've discussed this in training, that third parties don't have rights of appeal and the only way they can challenge a decision is to the High Court on a judicial review. Obviously, on this basis, the applicant could potentially challenge the decision by judicial review and looking at procedural irregularity or failure to take into account material considerations. So there is a right of legal challenge as opposed to a right of appeal, and that's the distinction.
But that only legal challenge would be the fact that there was a mechanism agreed for a viability study and has been accepted by both sides. Then it's brought to the committee. The committee disagrees with the whole principle of it, but that doesn't matter. Is that what we're being told?
that could be one interpretation, I'm sure. Councillor Stanger, we're still on questions.
One question before, so public benefit, does that form enough of a reason if there was later on in the debate? I'm on about is public benefit, because obviously when we made the decision on Conkers originally, that was probably, I know it wasn't completely clear cut and unanimous, so it was kind of a major part of that original decision. So removing the public benefit, and would that class as a material consideration?
I think, as Ed explained, you're not removing public benefits in whole, it's just a change in public benefits. So the affordable housing is gone here, so that's the change. What is left over as a public benefit is the 15 market houses, economic benefits, everything else Ed said. So it's just different benefits. From an officer point of view, we're saying they are reason enough to support this. The viability report independently assessed, their arguments stack up. That's in line with adopted policy. So, it is tricky because really, if you were going to argue with the viability perspective, you would need evidence contrary to, instead of just expressing concern.
Yeah, that's the thing. It just obviously, in what's similar to what Nicola said, it's just what other industry in the world is completely off the cuff comment that you're guaranteed certain profit, but that's just minor.
Exactly, Councillor Stanger.
Councillor McLaren.
Yes, I do have a question, Chair.
Thank you.
So, if we were subject to legal challenge, what is your advice regarding the level of risk of losing that legal challenge?
Say, be difficult to say. It would be on the basis that potentially you didn't take into account material considerations and the evidence that's been submitted, unless you had evidence to the contrary that evidence that's been provided to you is, there's a problem with it or it's not satisfactory. So it'd be very difficult to give advice on that basis.
Councillor Groner.
Is it a material consideration that there's only 3 houses and that we'd already reduced the 40% contribution to 20%?
It is material that there be no affordable. Yeah, there's a reduction in affordable housing provision. Yeah, so it is material, but the difficulty we have is that the difficulty that we have is that we have a viability review which says they can't provide it.
Is that a question or is it a comment? Because I'm going to have the first comment. Not yet. I'm going to have the first dibs.
there any debating to be
Right.
done?
I'm just going to say, I wanted to say this first because I remember this one, and I have no reason to doubt that the representative of the builder, the applicant, came here honest, open, everything was above board. But I just remember her saying that originally they wanted 12. We, the council, said, make it 15. They said, great, we can now include 3 affordable houses and we can go for a cheaper access road, because I think they wanted to access it at the top and the bottom. So, and we said, whoopee-doo. That decision from that day starts with the committee were disappointed that it was only 20% and not 40%. I cannot put the right word to how I feel now, and I'm not doubting their viability and all the rest of it, but again, we have yet another example of somebody coming back and saying, sorry, we can't do affordable housing. The affordable housing that partly sold us on the application, that partly affects our decision. And then they come back and say viability. And I don't know, I can't say to them, have you, for example, thought of 2 sets of terraced houses of smaller design that would cost you less to build, which would then be affordable? But no, they've got their plan, and that's what they're sticking to, and we have to stick to that. So we are left with either saying yes or no. If we say no, they might not build it, in which case we don't get the 15 houses. If we say yes, they build the 15 houses, and nobody in Iden can afford to buy them. It is beyond frustration, Councillor McLaren, and that's because I've been on the committee longer than you have. It's open for comments from anybody else. Councillor Stagger.
Yeah, I just want to say, and the problem is we have the system where we agree to planning and then you've already set the principle of development, which then we can't go back to say, oh, we don't want it anymore because we've already agreed to principle of development, which would be impossible to defend. And it just, what message does it send to developers? They seem to get permission and then they come back and who knows, if we get past today, they might sell the site. And you don't know, we can't control any of that. But it just is irritating. And I just think after paying all your costs and paying all your interest costs and your loan costs, you're still making 15 to 17% of quite a lot of money. And I'm not saying they shouldn't make money, of course you do, but sometimes if you invest in something, you win or lose sometimes, don't you? And that's part of it. But anyway, that's my opinion.
Oh, I killed everyone, sorry. So, the government blame the planning committees like this for these situations. Councillor Graham.
I just want to support Councillor Stanger, the new Conservative in our group, for saying that businesses should fail as well. And the knock-on problem is a wider comment, but the knock-on problem, this is why land costs are so high, because there's always this backstop. And land costs are high, it gets passed on, and this is why houses are so expensive. It's all to do with land costs. And we're underpinning this system with this ridiculous notion that everybody's guaranteed a 20%. I mean, I'm in the wrong business. You know, I lose money every year. Nobody's propping me up. So I don't think we should be blackmailed with the threat of, well, we're not going to build it. I don't think we should I don't think that should be a consideration for us, because we have to look at what's in front of us, not necessarily the threat of not building something. The threat of a JR is a separate issue. And I think given how the committee voted on it back in October 24, what concessions were made, I don't buy the viability study. And it might be consultants, and I'm sure they're experts, but we all know what we think of experts.
Thank you. Councillor Creaser.
Pressing the wrong button, sorry about that. When this came up before, we had quite a heated discussion about it. I remember we went with loads of people up to that site, because Paul Osborne met us there and was talking us through it. The other thing is that we were having lots of discussions about viability then, and it turns out that there is like this computation they have to work out what's what, and they should know that. And if they're worried that they're going to be digging into their pot deeper than they'd anticipated, that's their problem, not ours. And to turn around and say they don't want to build social housing, I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, a lot of the affordable housing these days are not social housing level anyway, but to build none at all and potentially blackmailing us saying, well, we can't do this because of whatever, well, someone will. And if they keep doing what they've been doing over the last 5 years, to my knowledge, if not much longer than that, it's going round and round the houses, keep reselling. We've got a few property pieces of land here in Rye like that. It goes round, it gets sold again, it goes round, it gets sold again. And every time it gets sold again and it's more cost on the land or whatever, then they're looking to then knock off anything that we need for the community. So not that my opinion matters today because I'm not there. I do apologise about that, but I would be very concerned if we bowed down to this, because we seem to be continuously having to bow down to it, and we're not getting the properties built anyway. So, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make it clear, I know you made reference to the blackmail. I'm not aware that the developers have said they won't build it. That was me saying it's a possibility. Bearing in mind the viability shows that even with 100% marketable housing, they might still make a loss. So their profit and loss people might eventually say, don't build it and wait for it. So it wasn't a threat. Yeah. They're not telling us they're not going to build it if we don't say yes. That was me saying it could be a possible. Councillor Meir, then Councillor McLaren, then Councillor Stagg. Councillor Meir.
Really, I think other councillors have said what I was going to say. You've made the point that it is unaffordable, even at 100% market housing, which would lead you to suppose that it won't be built in its present form unless market conditions change substantially. And to somebody who's not in the building business, the development business, it seems almost inconceivable that a development on a greenfield site in a very agreeable location with some very attractive houses should be economically impossible. It seems absolutely beyond belief, but that's how the figures pan out. And yes, it is the lack of, the lack of the moral hazard, or the lack of it, in the land purchase prices. It makes absolutely no sense that we should be in this position. On a previous occasion, before this present council was constituted, we received training on this. We were so angry, as we are today, that officers provided us with training. I remember Councillor Mary Barnes being there, sitting next to me. And it may be that we're due for another informal discussion offline and see if there's anything that we can do about this.
Sort of add to that. The strange thing is that in those days, it was builders who did not want to build private houses. They wanted to turn them all into affordable. I mean, Ticehurst in Hurst Green, for example, and Burwash, finished up with all affordable. That was fine. But this is the reversal of that.
Before I come on to Councillor McLaren, and did that training make us feel any less angry? No, I don't think so. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say from my point of view that I do not lay the blame entirely at the door of developers who exist within a competitive housing market. The system that we are working within here means that this pattern of, put it in at today's prices, then go back for a variation, a developer who doesn't want to do that is competing with developers who do. So I don't personally lay it all at don't lay all the blame at the door of the developers. I think it's your point as well, Tim, that there is a systemic issue here that is warping this market, and the ultimate losers here are our residents waiting in temporary accommodation for a proper home.
Councillor Stanger, then Councillor Barnes.
Yeah, I just think that I'm normally just how many times 3 years I've been on the committee, and it's just constant. And I'm not saying we don't need stuff, but I just feel that this was definitely part of the original decision and why we agreed it and where we're at. So I propose to refuse against contrary to officer's advice, and I've got 4 reasons I've written down.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute. Councillor Mrs Barnes.
My mind has gone a complete blank, but it was really on the subject of how the people of Iden feel about this, because it was made perfectly clear in the report that the people of Iden were dead against this, but would only agree if to the concession that there were some affordable houses. They're going to finish up with a housing development which may or may not sell in the middle of their village, which they didn't want, to the detriment of affordable housing, which they desperately did want. So, we haven't actually touched on that aspect, but it was made very clear in the report.
I think we did, but it comes to the fact that there's very little we can do about it now because the principle has been established. But yeah, and that's also why I made the fact that I don't know, I'm not a builder, but I wonder if the developer has looked at they might have to, changing the actual houses so that they would be acceptable, because they might not be affordable, but at least they're 2 and 3 bedroom, not bigger, at an affordable price.
Just want to caveat what I said earlier. Just I respect the officers and the professional viability assessment. But I believe, obviously, with any financial assessment, whatever metrics you put into it, it comes out of it. So it's kind of what is the base figures, obviously, and then what comes out of it. I'm not saying I'm not in a place, I'm not an expert on viability, and also I respect the officers' position and the council's independence. But I just feel that they're only as good as what goes into it at the original metrics. But
I don't see anyone bursting to make a comment, so if you want to do your thing again with your four reasons.
Reason 1, conflicts with policy DHG1, which is the affordable site allocations plan, is that right?
Sorry, Councillor Stanger, in what way is it conflicting?
Well, because it did have affordable and now it hasn't, so it hasn't, with a site like that. So what is it, not the right policy, I haven't monitored, but removing the affordable must go against one policy, does it?
You have the site allocation policy, which has got the requirement for 40% affordable housing.
That's the DHG1, I thought it says.
Yeah, that's the general policy on affordable housing provision in a district.
Yeah, and then failure to make...
So just give your reasons rather than the policies. And
okay, it's fine. Conflict with the affordable housing policy, loss of public benefits, failure to meet local housing need, and less restrictive alternatives not demonstrated. In other words, they haven't necessarily looked at off-site contributions for affordable or one unit, or just gone for all of it, gone. I know it's probably a bit weak, but that's just where I've got to.
Just read them out again, and that also gives the officers and Kirsty
that's fine,
time
yeah. So
to
we
think
go
about
conflict with policy regarding...
We've had this, I know, before with other members, and I've had messages from monitoring officers who've been watching broadcasts. I've just got to ask you...
I haven't got a pen and paper, so I'm writing on my phone.
You
so
read my mind. You didn't write that last night in anticipation of today. You've written it now.
I'm writing, so I haven't got a pen and paper, so
okay.
I'm on my Google Drive. So.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's the first reason. I don't know how well these stack up. Anyway, conflict with policy regarding affordable housing, site allocations, reason 2, loss of public benefits, because obviously the affordable housing has substantial public benefit. Failure to meet the local housing need, I don't know if that fills into it. And less restrictive alternatives not demonstrated.
What was 4, sorry?
So it's alternatives not completely demonstrated by off-site contributions. So like, did they really look at one or maybe off-site contributions or something rather than just chopping them all? If that makes any sense.
Does that include or looking at alternative buildings?
Well, just alternative.
While Matt and Ed are putting their brains to them, I think Councillor Groner, did you want to say something about
Well, just something on my mind was the fact that it's not profitable anyway. So why are we giving a deed of variation to a scheme that has been deemed by the system we're bound by as being unprofitable? Now, I don't know if you can translate that into planning speak, but that's just logic speak.
Well,
you see what I mean? There's something in that.
Firstly, I will try and attempt that because I suspect at the end of the day, the deed of variation still leaves them a challenge to build 15 houses at a loss. They might still decide to build them. I know what you mean, but and I don't know how much with this last minute sort of review, I'm not sure how much prices would have to go down by to get past their unviability into the point where they can actually give us some money. So I'm not sure, but yeah. But can you answer why the variation of?
Chairman, can I just step in?
Oh yes, sorry.
Sorry. So there is a distinction here between the viability in terms of going through the viability review and actually whether the developer will make any profit or not. In this particular case, the developer is still likely to make a profit, but they won't make the required profit of 15 to 20%. So the planning, when the viability review is undertaken, the planning practice guidance requires developers to make a return of 15 to 20%. In this case, they won't make that return. It doesn't necessarily mean that they won't make a profit.
So am I right in thinking if I was going to make £1.5 million profit and the viability says I'm only going to make £1 million, that would put the £500,000 into the unviability bit. Okay. Thanks.
Actually.
So, I don't think anyone ever said that chairing a planning committee would be boring, and it certainly isn't. They're just working on an answer to Councillor Stanger's reasons. They might not, we'll find out in a minute, because we've had legal put into Matt. Matt's now talking to Ed, and we'll get to it.
Presumably there's no strike date.
Sorry?
No date for striking ground or breaking ground or whatever you call it.
Don't know, we'll ask that in a minute. So, I'll let Matt, Edwin and possibly Kirsty address the points that Councillor Stanger's raised before I seek a seconder, because obviously those reasons will have been discussed.
Yeah, okay.
So over to Matt.
Right. Bear with me, I think. So, reason one, conflict with affordable housing policy, so that's DHG1 and then IDE1 in terms of the site allocation. There's criteria about affordable housing. That would be a risk of legal challenge, because to say there's conflict with that policy is not logical, because you've got the first requirement of providing affordable housing. If that's not achievable, yeah, you're allowed to do a viability assessment. It's written into that policy. That's what they have followed. They've done a viability, so you can't say, well, you can say it's contrary, but it would be open to legal challenge. The developer would say, well, it's exactly in line with that policy. Your policy allows me to do a viability appraisal. We've done that. It's been independently assessed. So that, I hope, explains that. We would strongly recommend against that. Condition 2, you said loss of public benefit. We discussed how it was a change in public benefit. So you'd lose the public benefit of affordable housing, but gain 15 market houses. On top of that, there would be financial benefits in terms of additional SIL. So there would be a change in that, which makes that reason tricky.
Is that subject to balance, or do you think that's hard to defend?
Tricky. You got. I mean, the majority of the site is allocated, so it's, and they've gone through the policy test for the viability.
There's any of them reasons. If they're all no good, it's fine.
Yeah, so that's tricky. Reason 3, failure to meet local housing need. We'd need evidence.
It's in the report about the Iden housing need.
So, what's specific to affordable or overall? I think we're all aware there's a great need for housing in general, affordable, social. Yes, yeah, there is. So, okay, so that. Yeah, and then for alternatives, it would, I think instead of refusing it outright, there may be justification to defer to see if the developer, you could express all the concerns that have been voiced today, and see if there's any other option that would be achievable for the developer. I mean, they're all, so at this, there is increased risk, even if it was, this was approved today with the 15 market houses, they're talking about minus £500,000 off the profit, which increases the risk of them developing it. So yeah, I mean, what if it was? Sorry, Chair.
So, I'm just going to say, so the first three, you are sort of agreeing with Councillor Stanger that they're a bit dodgy.
Yes.
The fourth one, there's no requirement for them to seek alternatives because that's the plan they've had approved, but we're sort of saying we could possibly defer it, sorry about that, we could possibly defer it to say to the developer, what alternative builds have you considered to make the viability better? And I'm just thinking that's seems to be what you're saying.
Could they deem us unreasonable then? That's what I don't want to stray into. But then that's what, because obviously we've agreed the current, I was just looking for reasons. If the officers have none and there's nothing substantial, I have to withdraw.
And while Ed and Matt, and I've just seen you, Councillor Groner, but I've benefited before by having Councillor John Barnes make a comment, and he has been waving at me. So I'm going to allow him to make a comment.
Sorry, it seems to me the point that people are missing is that if you go back to the original plan, the southern part of this site is in the area of outstanding natural beauty, was not designated for housing. And the tacit bargain that you made with the developer is he could use the southern part of the site in return for affordable housing. The second point, which stands out to me, is that he's choosing to make his viability assessment at a particular point of the market when the market is down. Unless he can guarantee that he's going to build within the next 12 months, then the market may well alter and alter in his favour, and the project will be viable. Frankly, we have a policy of mixed development. What worries me is less that this is affordable, but it did include rental and shared ownership. And we have a policy, quite a strong one, that we want our developments to be mixed. I would have thought there is a case for the moment for saying no, this application is premature unless you intend to build in the next 12 months.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Councillor Groner. I would say part of your second point is why we include the late stage review in case they built them and they are in a better position than they think they're going to be. As far as the first one is concerned, I like it, and I like your point, and thank you for making it, because it was part of that, the whole thing about the affordable and making it acceptable, and the fact that Rother said, have the other bit of land and make it 15 and not 12. But I'm not sure that's a reason to say no to the variation of deed. But I'm not sure what we can do with it, other than include it possibly, if we were to go down the other line that we spoke to again, to include it as part of our ongoing concerns with this development, in that we welcome, well, we accepted the development on the basis of this play-off between things, and then suddenly one bit drops out. It's beyond their control, it's beyond our control, but we're left trying to do the best we can for Rother and for the people of Iden. So you had something to say, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, and it was sort of a continuation from what Councillor Barnes said. In a perfect world, forget all the planning stuff, just go to pure logic world, you would say, okay, you go and build them. When you've sold 10 houses, then we do the viability study, and then you tell me how you're doing, and we'll adjust accordingly. That would be a partnership deal between a council and a developer, where you're really, there's a real honesty there, and you're doing it at the right time, because who knows what will happen to prices of houses and material costs, which have been coming down since Ukraine started and the peak in 2022, right? So that would be my first point. The second thing is, because you've raised this issue about trading the AONB land for the affordable housing, therefore, I would say what I'm hearing, this committee would be more than prepared to reconsider the original application.
But we can't.
But we can't. But again, I'm not in planning world, so we need some translation.
So in your non-planning world, totally agree. In the planning world,
but I don't know how we apply that. No.
We can't. And we've only been asked to say
But
yeah.
I think that one way of doing it would be to vote against. And then, let's come back to the table and let's talk.
Or the alternative to saying no would be a deferment, possibly, for other inquiries to be made. But, one moment. Matt, have you come up with your discussion on you were discussing the last point, I thought, between you and Ed,
Yes, the last point in terms of the deferral.
Yeah,
and
certainly reviewing alternatives.
I mean, that I think, the suggestion of the deferral would be more to do with what could they offer. What could they offer in terms with losing the affordable? What could be offered instead, like a financial contribution or something? I think if you're looking at redesigning the whole scheme, then I don't think we can do that under this. We can't do it under this application, this deed of variation. So, I mean, at the moment, the viability study talks about late-stage viability review, and if it became more viable and they sell for more when they're built out, that could result in a payment to us to use towards affordable housing. Perhaps we could ask them about whether a payment could be included.
So taking on,
it is,
but taking on Councillor Groner's point, and Kirsty just said, but that is a late stage review. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But can we dictate? I like Councillor Groner's point about you've built 5 houses. Can we dictate that it's not just a last stage? When is the last stage? When the last house is built? Can we dictate that you do a review after 5 houses, 10 houses? And can we dictate when that review should take place, so that we're not leaving it to, I mean, you could put last minute reviews, could be when the last tile gets put on the last house.
There's sort of a reverse of that, is that we could reject on the basis that the viability study is not in line with the build date, because there's no strike date.
Well, that would be a reason then for conditioning a mixture of time and houses, like 3 months after you've started, then when the houses, then when certain trigger points happen. Councillor McLaren.
Wouldn't they, though, say, well, we're not going to start until we know the conclusion of this variation? How can we start when we don't know the business plan that we're working to?
If you remember, Chairman, my suggestion was no unless you are about to start. It was a form of bargain.
Councillor Gray.
We build them and then can't sell them, like black guys.
They will sell them. Although some don't. Right, but what we've got in front of us is we haven't got a start date. And I take Councillor McLaren's point that one of the reasons we haven't got a start date is they haven't got a decision on whether or not they're doing the affordable houses. So some of it rests with us, what we say today, when they can kick off. And I'll come back to Councillor Stanger because I know he was moving a no, and we have to address that before we go on to a yes. But I'll come up with this staging of the review after we see. So, Matt.
Thank you. Just to add in a couple of bits relating to starting development and stage of review. The permission was issued October 2025 with development required to commence within 3 years. So it expires in October 28. So we've got two years, 3 months for the permission to run roundabout. In terms of what is termed the late stage review, the exact point that takes place is yet to be agreed. It was granted in October 2025, so last year. A year after we
Oh, yeah.
Correct. Correct.
Yes, obviously, sometimes it takes a while to negotiate the terms of a 106, and and the permission would only have been granted once the 106 was completed, because it was issued subject to completion of a 106.
Correct. 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8, 9. Yeah, 8 and 9 months on from the issue of the permission. Yeah.
I had something, but it went. So, Councillor Stanger, I'm going to come back to you with your proposal for no, and whether or not you still want to make it with different reasons, and then I can seek a seconder.
I would like to, but obviously my reasons weren't strong enough. So if officers could advise how I could model what I said into something that would have a half a chance of standing up, that was all.
I've got to say, I think they have, and I think they've struggled, but they can do it again.
We are struggling, I'm afraid. Yeah, in terms of a planning reason, it's tricky, and planning reason with support from our adopted policies, it's very challenging. I think our advice is, if you're strongly against it as a committee, then seek deferral for us to liaise with the developer to see if there's anything they can offer really financially. A redesign is not possible under this type of application, but in terms of the viability, we could.
Yeah, the main thing is obviously you can get some more money out of them, but that's the principle. I think was affordable housing and.
I appreciate that. And I mean, we are looking at 3 individual units here, and there would be challenges for a registered provider taking these on. There would be a lack of. Sorry. Well, it was granted. Yeah, I know we're going round, but I think my point is that what has been granted, what's on the table, if this is refused, it turns out to be more viable to build it, they go ahead and build. I don't think you're going to get the on-site affordable housing. I think it would be a contribution because of the low numbers. We've seen it elsewhere where developers have come back in and it's been a contribution instead of a very small number of actual on-site houses. So I think you are looking at losing, a contribution really.
So I'm getting the feeling there that possibly deferral is the way. I'll come to you. Deferral might be the way, but I've still got this. Can we change the last minute review to a staged review so that there's 3 bits to the review. It's not a last minute. So that if we deferred it and you go back and talk to them, because presumably the review has to be agreed, and instead of doing last minute, we could say, no, we want 3 stages to the review.
Self-build, is that an option? Convert the 3 into self-build plots.
I must admit, I shall get Kirsty to say what she just said to me, because I'm not too clear in me left ear at the moment. No, I will do. But it struck me that part of that is also, yes, we've got what we've got in front of us, and yes, there's not a registered provider to take on the rented and the other one, but when you go into part ownership, shared ownership, is that with the developer or is that with a third person as well? Because it seems to me that they could still do that, or even 2 of them. But I know that's not here. That's not for this. That's for discussions with them. It just seems we're desperate to save something of the affordable housing for Iden and for Rother. I'll come to you now. I know Councillor Stanger wants to come back to you. Councillor Graham.
Can that be a consideration, that it's a failure to explore other options before going to the viability study?
I suspect it could be a reason for a deferment rather than for saying no.
For deferral.
Councillor Stanger.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll change. So I will seek deferral, and based on the 4th option, which was the alternative not completely explored and demonstrated. Maybe you might be able to get something out of them that will contribute towards our buying of houses at the moment, or something in a capital programme or something. But there's no guarantees, but if it's worth a shot, I think we should have a go at it.
That would also, I would suggest, include looking at a staged review rather than last.
Yeah, include a multi-stage review of the lake thing.
And possibly, because I know I said it, and I'm often talking through the back of my neck, but I wonder about this, the shared ownership of who is the shared ownership with. I should know. If it's with a third party, it's probably shaky ground, but if it's with the developer, perhaps we could still save something along those lines rather than the affordable rents and things. But I'm conscious that we're deferring it for work to... I'll come to you, Cheryl. We're doing it for work to be done, for investigation to be done. We're not just kicking it into the long grass and hoping it'll go away. There is a reason for the deferment, is that we want more information, and we're trying desperately to save something of the affordable housing. And I know ultimately it might be an off-site provision for money for it, which can't be as good as having it on site. But Councillor Creaser.
So in terms of where the ownership of shared ownership and such like it's not usually with the developer, it's usually with a housing association or registered provider, because they have access to other things. Because very often if you get a house, particularly in the countryside, through a registered provider, quite often there's covenants to protect them to be continuously shared ownership or whatever else, because it gives people a foot on the ladder. The government, successive governments have really let us down, where the current government have got these very ambitious plans to build thousands of homes where they don't need to be built. We've got a country that has got towns with selling houses off for 50 quid because no one wants to live there. And then you've got places like this where we're wanting to build on fields. That's bonkers. But, the government's got to go, they put all these demands in, but they've got to get their finger out and put something into it to make it possible for us to do. So it may well be that through whatever body we all belong to, we need to start pushing for that. The other thing, of course, is that we don't know what's going to happen with these new unitaries. And will they have more power or less, or will they have different perspectives? And we're trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear here, knowing full well we are basically bashing our head on a brick wall, which is really very distressing, particularly for people who are living in these villages, because, you know, if you are a villager, and quite a lot of people in the villages don't have enough money to go and buy a house or whatever, not because they're anything other than that they don't earn enough money. And of course, to have that kind of mix and match of kind of economic availability is really significant in terms of people that are there. If we are only selling houses, it means that a lot of the people that are buying these houses are not buying them to live in. And that's the thing that bothers me more than anything else, that without being cheeky or disrespectful, I'm getting the reasoning that quite a lot of these big, over ambitious things that are coming down from government are basically a bunch of hubris, to be truthful. And it's making it very difficult. We've got people, as you've said, all of you, people who've got nowhere to live, they're in temporary accommodation, and the temporary accommodation that is available is bloody awful. They're often in those sort of places for years on end, not a couple of months, years. And so a bit like the discussion we had this morning regarding that youngish family in Bordeaux Breed, where, you know, the disruption to that family is going to be pretty grim. It's going to be the same for everybody else as well. And we're just being asked to, as I say, make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And I'll give our officers their due. If there's ever going to be a silk purse out of any sow's ear, they'll do it. But I can't see where we're going to get with this unless these developers they're in it to make a living. Yes, I absolutely understand that. But when you're dealing with people or organisations such as ourselves, we're not in it for profit. We're in it for the social profit, not our pocket profit. And so therefore, I just find the whole thing just very, very frustrating. And I have to say, sitting back once in a while like I have today, unfortunately, because I'm not well enough to move out this time of day, is quite revealing. And I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to sit back and listen. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Mee and then Councillor Stanger. I was going to say, when I read through this originally, I kept thinking of my own situation. Some of these people are down from London, aren't they? Councillor Mee.
Well, as are many of us, even if it was many years ago. I just feel, having had officers' advice and having chewed the cud extensively, I feel that really we're going nowhere. We come up with no solutions to this, and that probably we simply have to agree it as proposed by officers, and then wait and see what the applicant does, whether they build, with the review mechanism, of course, whether they build or whether they come back to us with a fresh application with a more economically viable scheme. I think we're trying too hard. I mean, we are fed up. And as a completely separate exercise, we really should be looking at this and making representations in the proper quarters to get a better system in place. It really is long overdue.
John.
Thank you. Councillor Stanger.
Yeah, so I feel quite similar to Councillor Mee. If we could get anything out of the deferral, even some contributions to some off-site housing somewhere, something, so we could buy another house to reduce this of temporary accommodation or something along, if we get something into the, if it's possible, if it's not, if the officers think it's going to be unnecessary and waste of time, please let me know. But it's, I'm led because I know obviously we've tried to everything possible to try to hold it to scrutiny, but it's difficult, isn't it? So.
Thank you. I'm just going to check with Matt something that may help us. I'm just going to mention that later in the year, and I can't remember which committee it's likely to be going to, but there is likely to be a policy going somewhere, and by September possibly we'll have a handle on the fund for the affordable housing. The money's been going into a pot, but there is no policy anywhere to spend it, and I think by September we'll have a policy and a pot, and we might be able to.
Yeah, that's the main principle. The main principle is even if they offered a contribution into something, whatever it would be, if it's possible. And obviously, I know they have to accept it profit, but they're still going to make money irrelevant of what happens. And
So to paraphrase, so are you still moving deferment on the basis
only I want the officer's advice if it's worth it or not, because otherwise I'm not going to waste time. Otherwise, you're already busy enough, and it's just if you're not going to achieve anything, it's pointless doing it, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I mean, I'd be concerned about deferring it for that because the review that they've undertaken is showing for viability purposes it's not viable. So for them to then ask them to then stump up some additional money, and we don't know how much money we're talking about either, I'm not sure that's going to work.
Yes, I'll withdraw the development.
Okay. Councillor Graham.
Vote against on the basis that it's not a viable scheme.
And that allows for your...
Vote against because it's not a viable scheme. I'm not sure that's a reason for voting against the proposal. I'm getting told no here.
Have you got over your moment of cynicism when you said you thought that this was being rather carefully mapped out by the developer? As far as timing was concerned and...
Moment's gone.
Moment's gone.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move that we accept the officer's recommendation to agree to the deed of variation, but we change the last minute review to a structured review that would include, has to be a combination of dates, so much after the ground's been broken, then after so many houses have been built, and then another trigger at the end, so that we're keeping the developers aware that we wanted the 20%, we couldn't have the 40%, they offered us 20%, and that's what we really wanted, and that's what we really need.
So just to be clear, this so a structured review would consist of an initial review at what stage?
Groundworks.
And groundworks have started.
Well, or it would probably be clearer to word it that no above ground works commence, so they could do groundworks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So consisting of an initial review prior to any above ground.
Sorry, isn't that
work.
now though? This is prior to any...
No. Above ground works relating to construction of dwellings.
Yeah, you'd have to word it as after the commencement of development, but prior to above ground works.
Exactly. Yeah. Well done.
In relation to dwellings.
Okay.
So
It suddenly dawned on what Councillor
probably,
Cronin was saying. It has to be after they've started work, but before they go up.
in terms of the houses.
Because you could do it tomorrow.
Quite often
if you're saying before, you could do it today.
So once they commence, and then before they get plastered,
Yeah.
after they get out the footings.
Yeah. Okay. And then another review.
After 8 houses have been done?
I think 5
Of course, unfortunately, they might, of course, build a little bit of...
They do deliberately make them expensive.
I mean, arguably.
Yeah. Rather than us trying to fix a date now, we've got the first one. Delegate authority to the officers to make sure that there's at least one more review before the last minute review.
So 3.
3 reviews.
3 reviews, okay.
And that timing to be decided by officers, but obviously not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday the same week. Yeah. We could say in consultation with the chairman of the planning committee.
So 1 mid-stage review, 1 final.
I'll second Brian.
So you may not have heard that I've just put in there also in consultation with the chair of planning.
Yeah,
It might not be me, of course.
I'd like to second Brian's motion. So
Wow, I was going to do that. I would like to second your motion, Chairman.
You've never done that before.
Yeah.
It's open for debate, but I'm reading the room. We'll go straight to a vote.
I think that's a really, really practical solution in what is quite a handcuffed situation. You know, it's in front of committee, but there's not a breadth of
So I'm going to come
judgment
to Councillor Barnes, who wants to make comment, and then Councillor Stanger. Councillor Barnes.
Just to ask about the road, will they have to build the road before they do any of that? Does that count as above ground building?
That's what I was seeking clarification on. So above ground works in relation to the dwellings, and that allows foundations to be laid, and if access is required as well.
Because all that work has to be done, whether it's affordable or not.
Most of the costs are in the groundwork in the road, aren't they?
Yeah. So that, we should be safe there. If we got delegated authority for the wording, we'll word it correctly.
In consultation with Chair of Planning. So that's proposed by me, seconded by Councillor. Oh, you had a comment to make, sorry.
It was only just, I think we've explained today, I know we've gone round and round and round, but it's just so frustrating that these people, and I'm not saying they're disingenuous or they've done anything bad at all, but it just seems constantly coming back and forward with this affordable. We'll never get any built, will we? So, and so just that's why I was digging my heels in, but thank you for your advice.
Right, so all those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. That brings us to the end of today's meeting. I was quite surprised we've exceeded May's meeting. Agenda item 9 has been withdrawn. Agenda item 10, date of the next site inspections, Tuesday the 26th of July, Department of Town Hall at 9:30. The next committee meeting will be on the 28th of July. That brings us to the end. Thank you to everyone for their contributions, and I mean that actually because today has exercised our brains quite a lot and quite frustrating in many parts. And goodbye to everyone watching online. Thank you.